Beneath a shroud of falling snow, the world outside the Thorn household seemed to hold its breath. The cold wrapped itself around the wooden walls, seeping through the cracks like whispered regrets. Inside, the dim glow of a flickering lantern cast trembling shadows on the worn floorboards, and Elias Thorn stood silently by the frost-kissed window. His breath formed small clouds that mingled with the chill pressing against the glass. There, waiting, was Shadow, his German shepherd paws, tapping a soft, insistent rhythm on the pane. As if trying to shake the very silence that had settled over the house, Elias's eyes traced the familiar curve of Shadow's muzzle, the gleam in his watchful eyes, and the way his breath curled into the night like a fragile promise. That quiet tapping was a sound that had become both balm and burden in the weeks since Samuel, their son, disappeared without a trace. The town had fallen silent, or worse, had whispered gossip twisting through the frosty air like a bitter wind. But Shadow had never ceased his vigil, as if he held a thread to the boy lost in the depths of winter's unforgiving embrace. The memory of that day was a hollow ache, sharp and unyielding. Samuel's laughter had once filled these rooms bright as sunlight on freshly fallen snow, wild and free. Now, only the echo of that laughter remained, tangled in the frost and the shadows. Elise's hands clenched at his sides, the rough skin biting into his palms. Mabel, his wife, sat by the hearth, her eyes glassy and distant, the weight of waiting etched into the lines of her face. She wore her grief quietly, like a second skin, refusing to let it break her entirely. Outside, the world was still, save for the gentle scratching of Shadow's paws. The tapping was soft but relentless, a heartbeat in the quiet, a summons from the darkness. Mabel glanced toward the window, her breath catching as she watched the dog's steadfast persistence. "He's trying to tell us something," she whispered, voice trembling with fragile hope. But Elias said nothing. He could not yet believe that hope would ever warm the cold that had settled deep inside him. The townsfolk's eyes were heavy with judgment, as if Samuel's absence was a mark upon the family rather than the cruel whim of fate. Reverend Silas Crow's sermons had become sharper, casting shadows of blame where once there had been compassion. "Lost souls bring cold winds," he intoned one Sunday, voice echoing through the small chapel, leaving Mabel and Elias to shoulder the weight of silent condemnation. Their neighbors' averted gazes and hushed whispers cut deeper than the winter's chill, yet amidst the harsh frost of their lives, small acts of grace shimmered like fragile icicles catching the weak light of dawn. Annie Gray, a woman whose own past was stitched with quiet sorrows, visited with warm bread wrapped in linen. Her eyes carried empathy, though words were few. Her presence a delicate thread reconnecting the Thorns to the breath of the living town. It was in those stolen moments, between the shared silence and the unspoken understanding, that Mabel found a flicker of strength to carry on. Night deepened and settled like a slow, dark tide, swallowing the day's light and drowning the world in cold whispers. Shadow tapped once more rogent nound. Elias pushed back from the window, his heart an uneven drum in his chest. He stepped outside, boots crunching against the hardened snow, the biting air a sharp reminder of all they had lost. Shadow's dark eyes met his, steady and unflinching. Before turning toward the whispering woods that bordered the town, without a word, Elias found himself following, Mabel's hand clasping his wrist tightly behind him. The snow muffled their steps, each breath hanging white and fragile between them. The woods loomed like a slumbering giant, its skeletal branches reaching toward the moon, casting delicate shadows on the ground. The air tasted of pine and forgotten secrets. Cold and sharp with possibility, Shadow led them with unwavering purpose, weaving a path through the trees as though guided by a memory deeper than any spoken plea. Elias felt the taut thread of fear and hope entwining in his chest. He had no certainty here, only the fragile hope that somewhere beneath the thick blanket of winter, a clue waited. A sign that their boy had not been swallowed by the cold forever as they walked. The world around them seemed to slow, time stretching thin like a ribbon unraveling in the wind. Each crunch of snow beneath their boots echoed with the weight of the unknown. Mabel's fingers tightened on Elias's arm, a silent tether in the freezing dark. The loneliness that had settled around their home felt distant here, replaced by something quieter but no less fierce. The fierce pulse of love that refused to break. The town might have whispered them lost. But here, in the hush of the winter woods, they were still holding on, still listening to the taps that broke the silence. Shadow's rhythmic pause on the snow became their heartbeat, steady and unyielding. A guide through the shadows that stretched between the trees. Elias's eyes caught the faintest glimmer of something tangled in the branches, a small scrap of fabric, worn and threadbare. He reached out, fingers numb, and pulled free a fragment of Samuel's scarf. The scent of pine and cold air clung to it, but beneath was a whisper of home, a tether to the boy who had vanished. Mabel's breath hitched, her eyes glistening with unshed tears, but she did not speak. Words were too fragile here. Shadow stood watchful, head low, as if guarding a secret. The cold pressed in around them, but for the first time since the long, empty days began, Elias felt the weight inside him shift, a slow thaw beneath winter's hard grip. They did not know what lay ahead, but the path was clear. The taps on the window had led them out of the silence and into the night's fragile hope. The snow began to fall heavier now, blanketing the earth in quiet white. The town behind them was a distant hum, its whispers fading beneath the falling flakes. Elias glanced at Mabel, her face pale but resolute in the lantern's glow, and he knew the journey was far from over. But for the first time, he believed that the story they carried, their grief, their love, their loss was not yet finished, and so they followed Shadow deeper into the woods. Each step a soft promise against the cold, a slow-burning hope whispered in the hush of winter's night. The tapping on the window had not been just a call, it was a beginning. The night held its breath with them, waiting. The deeper they stepped into the forest, the more the world seemed to fold away behind them, leaving only the whisper of snow falling and the steady beat of shadows pause on the frozen earth. The trees arched overhead like silent sentinels, their bare branches heavy with ice that glittered faintly in the moonlight. Each breath Elias and Mabel drew was sharp and cold, the air tasting of pine, resin, and distant, forgotten stories. Around them, the woods held an ancient hush, one that seemed to listen. To wait, Shadow moved with purpose, weaving through the thickets, nose lowered, tracking a trail only he could discern. Elias felt the weight of every step, the past pressing against his skin, the memory of laughter and absence weaving a fragile thread that pulled him forward. Mabel's hand brushed against his sleeve. It was a quiet, unspoken gesture, but it carried the weight of years of shared sorrow and resilience. There was no need for words. This silent communion was a testament to the love that refused to waver. Time itself seemed to slow in that icy cathedral. Each second stretched out like the lingering echo of a half-remembered song. The crunch of snow beneath their boots became a steady rhythm, a heartbeat in the cold dark. The townsfolk's harsh whispers felt a world away, irrelevant here among the towering trees and shadowed paths. The cold bit deep, but something warmer stirred beneath their skin, the fragile bloom of hope. A slow, careful light growing in the depths of their hearts. Suddenly, Shadow halted, a low growl rumbling from his throat. Elias stopped too, heart tightening. In the stillness, the faintest sound drifted to their years, a boy's breath, ragged and weak, caught somewhere beneath the snow and silence. They followed Shadow's lead to a small hollow hidden beneath a tangle of fallen branches and white. There, barely visible through the frost, was the outline of a boy curled against the cold earth. Elias knelt beside him, breath-catching as recognition settled in like a dawn breaking through winter fog. It was Samuel, shivering, but alive. Mabel's hands trembled as she gently brushed snow from his face, her fingers tracing the delicate lines of her son's cheek, a map of absence and return. Tears welled, unbidden and bright, carving warm trails down cold skin. No words came. There was no need. The reunion spoke in whispers, in the soft touch of hands, in Shadow's quiet presence. Guarding them all like a guardian spirit, Samuel's eyes fluttered open, wide with fear and wonder. He clung to Shadow's fur as if it were a lifeline to a world that had nearly slipped away. Elias wrapped an arm around him, the rough warmth of his coat a fragile shield against the biting cold. Mabel leaned in, her breath mingling with her son's, the unspoken promises of never letting go woven into that frozen moment. The past weeks of waiting, the long nights haunted by empty rooms, all seemed to dissolve in the glow of this fragile return. The woods seemed to exhale around them, the tension easing like snow melting under a hesitant sun. Elisa's eyes met Mabel's, and in that glance was a slow, growing strength, the quiet dignity of survival, the stubborn flame of love rekindled. They knew the path home would be slow and uncertain, but this moment was a beginning, a delicate stitch in the fabric of their fractured lives as they rose. Shadow stepped forward, nose to the ground, leading the way back through the tangled silence. The snow continued to fall softly, a gentle veil draping the earth in stillness. Behind them, the forest held its secrets, the whispered tales of loss and hope entwined beneath the frost. But ahead lay the fragile promise of warmth and light, the slow unfolding of a new chapter written in quiet resilience. The journey back was slow, each step a cautious reclaiming of what had been lost. The cold bit, but their hearts were tempered by something stronger, an unspoken bond that grew with every footfall. They moved as one, shadowed figures breaking through the darkness, carrying with them the fragile hope that had blossomed in the heart of winter. In the quiet that followed, Elias found his voice, low and steady. "We are not broken. Mabel, we are waiting holds us together." She nodded, a tear slipping free, shining like a fragment of glass in the lantern light. No grand declarations, just the steady pulse of love, slowly healing wounds no one else could see. Back in town, the whispers persisted, but they no longer carried the same weight. The Thorne family had stepped beyond judgment, beyond isolation. They carried with them a story that the cold could not freeze, a story of faith in the unseen, of the gentle persistence that outlasts the longest night. The townsfolk might never fully understand, but that mattered less now. What mattered was the soft light of hope that burned quietly beneath their winter sky. To you, watching this tale unfold, remember this: life's deepest wounds are often hidden beneath layers of silence and snow. But even in the coldest winters, a tap's steady, unwavering can lead us home. Listen for it. Trust it. For sometimes, salvation comes not in grand gestures, but in the quiet faith of a loyal heart. If this whispered tale stirred something deep within you, consider subscribing for more stories that touch the soul, that slow time and invite you to feel, to hope, and to believe again. The night is long, but the dawn always waits.